your time with 14 Intelligence Company, the debt in Northern Ireland, obviously significant part of history to be in amongst, and in the capacity that you were in, must have been an interesting way of interacting with the conflict. And just keen to hear a bit more about what your objectives were and how you interacted with things. And I'm curious to know more about Q cars specifically, because they were very important for your operations in many ways, weren't they?
Yeah, well, I must admit, when I went to Northern Ireland doing the undercover bit, it changed my perception of Northern Ireland, because when I first went to Northern Ireland as a youngster, the Catholics were the bad people, and the Protestants were the good guys, and it because you know nothing else, if that makes sense, and that's what's embedded in the young soldiers at the time. Not realizing, I suppose, that there are bad people on both sides. And when we were doing the undercover stuff, it was very evident that a lot of our work was actually against the Protestants, because there are bad people on both sides. So it was a mishmash of working against the IRA and also the Protestant groups as well. And that was the most satisfying part of the job, is that there was no distinction between, just because of a religious side of it. If you was a bad person carrying a gun, it didn't matter what religion you were going to get it. If that makes sense, and it was a good eye opener. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I found, because I've got this bit of a rebellion streak about me. A lot of the good intel that I actually produced was doing things not by the book, if that makes sense. And because at the time we didn't have vehicles that had trackers on. You had a tracker on your person, if something was to happen, but your car didn't have a tracker on it, which was great for people that have got a bit of a suspicious mind when you're trying to get other intelligence. It was great. We call it the rogue side of it, and a lot of the stuff that we got was actually by a rogue operator going off the grid somewhat, to get intelligence. And a quick story was, we were due to do a close target recce, CTR, on a house in a staunch Republican area in Belfast. And that afternoon, we were also on a surveillance serial. So we was in our cars, following a target. And then before we lifted off, we'd been told, and bear in mind that I was going to be one of the two people that was going to be breaking into this house. So I just wanted to make sure, because Special Branch from the RUC had insisted that this house was empty, and I always had my doubts, if that makes sense. So I pretended. So I had a clipboard, pulled away from the rest of the team. The rest of the team were doing something, but I then, because we were in that area, I then sort of stopped, parked up, went walkabout as you do, with a clipboard, and I just took the number of the house of the street behind the target house, if that makes sense. Knocked on the door, not expecting anyone to answer, because we've been told the house is empty, blah 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 blah, and shock horror, quite a senior IRA individual opens the door, Mr. Grumpy, and I said, "Listen, in my nice English accent, can you tell me where blah blah street is?" And he said, "It's the street behind here, not this one." "Oh, okay then. Oh, sorry, mate. Yeah, blah, blah, blah," and off I went. Now, the reason I spoke English, and not, there's a lot of people assume that you should try and learn a Belfast accent. You try and do a Belfast accent to a Belfast national, he'll suss you out instantly, as being a bit of a prat trying to. So I used to, I spoke English, because ultimately there were quite a few English people Brits working in Belfast. Not military. The normal sort of workers that are out there doing the job. And we also had Queen's University, so quite a few Brits there as well. So I just made I'm going to speak English and sod it, if that makes sense. And as it happens, if you were pinged, people were a bit suspicious about you, and they would try and engage in conversation. You could see the relief that you were speaking English, because their biggest concern was you were either a Catholic or a Protestant in a Protestant or a
So
Catholic
if you were
area.
in the
Yeah,
middle, you weren't a
yeah,
threat.
absolutely. And I certainly didn't look like a squaddy. You know, my nickname.
You look like a drug runner, as you said.
Well, my nickname in the regiment was Jesus or Custer. Can you go and tell Colonel Custer to get his hair cut, or go and ask Jesus? Because it was just, you can see it's fairly white now, but it was mega blonde hair, if that makes sense. So I
What happened to the IRA man that opened the door? Because I'm sure he wasn't thrilled to have revealed himself in such a capacity.
no, absolutely, but it was good intel. But trying to get that back, trying to explain how I saw this guy coming out the door was actually quite difficult, because ordinarily you can't go and knock on target people's doors, if that makes sense. It's not the done thing, if that makes sense. So I alluded to the fact that I drove past accidentally, and he just happened to be on the doorstep, and thankfully we did do that, because we would have broken into that house that night, and if it had spooked us, it could have ended up quite dodgy, to say the least. But
I can
but
imagine.
thoroughly enjoyed the trip out there. And what I found out was SAS guys that do surveillance are quite aggressive, um, purely because of the nature of your background, if that makes sense. So they don't make the best surveillance people, because they are they're a bit RoboCop minded. I'm going to get that. You lock onto a target and away you go. Whereas surveillance over there is slightly different. And I've done surveillance in the UK, and it's totally different, because your third part.
Yeah. What did your work with MI5 look
Yeah,
like?
well,
Because you did a little bit later on, didn't
yeah,
you?
well, I mean that's totally different, because when you're following somebody in London, you don't have the same. We call it third party awareness. So other people being aware of what other people look at you as doing. Because if your third party awareness is not up to speed in Northern Ireland, you're going to get yourself killed, because you're in these hard nationalist estates, or the Shankill Road, where the hardcore Protestants are. You're following people. And if you spook somebody else, you're going to get yourself killed, or you're going to get somebody else killed, if your third party awareness is not on the ball. Whereas in London, slightly different, because you don't have that same problem. So I found MI5 work in London a lot more chilled out and relaxed, as opposed to following hardcore terrorists carrying weapons in Northern Ireland. Totally different.